Dawn cut a thin line along the ridge and left me standing on its spine with nothing but my breath for company. 70 riders faced me across the gap, each holding a white feather like a quiet verdict. They watched the way a hawk watches a rabbit. Decide what kind of thing it is. I had no gun and no horse, only the ache of a night's walk and the taste of dust. Then the wind shifted and carried the small sounds. Leather, wood, a horse blowing through its nose. That live inside discipline. Silence is louder than gunfire when you think you might deserve it. Yesterday, I did something that felt right the way a burned hand feels clean in river water. I found a woman with fever and a torn shoulder near the boundary stones and did the only decent thing left in me. I put her on my horse and sent him where I could not. It should have ended there, but the world keeps a ledger. They move like a chessboard taught to breathe. A file slid a pace to the left and froze. A pair stepped forward on an angle, and the line behind them softened. I knew enough about Apaches to know I did not know their rules. The feathers were the strangest. White, clean, held where I could see them, as if the sharpest weapon here was the idea they meant. I swallowed the habit of guessing and stuck to watching. I raised both hands a little from my sides, palms open. Then I set my right hand on my chest and opened it toward them, slow, twice, like a man placing cards face up. The trick with fear is to give it a job. I told mine to count breaths, one in, one out, and let the mountain take the rest. A memory tugged, my sister's hand cooling in mine the night her fever took her, and the 2 years I spent wearing grief and emotion. Yesterday, I stopped long enough to act like the brother I had not been in time. Today I was paying for stopping. The lead rider sat a bay with a white blaze, gray at the temples, calm enough to make me sweat. He didn't signal, he didn't need to. The line breathed with him. Beyond the ridge, a thin rope of women's song drifted. Just a few notes, like the earth humming to itself. It made those feathers look less like surrender and more like a script I could not read. One rider dismounted and walked 3 steps toward me. He lifted his feather, tipped it toward his heart, then turned it sideways. A question? A marker? He went back to his place as another line edged right. The air felt scored with rules. I understood one thing only. Whatever this was, it wasn't an ambush. It was a weighing. The thought steadied me the way a beam steadies a roof in wind. If there is a law at work, even one I don't know, a man can stand under it. So I stood. I have run from winter, from debt, from my temper. I did not run from the quiet. My boots settled into the grit. My hands stayed open where they could be seen. I waited until the sun pushed a clean edge of gold over the far hills and set every feather flashing. Then the gray-haired rider eased his bay forward alone and halted halfway. He raised his feather to the height of his eyes and held it steady. I opened my arms a little wider to show I had nothing in them but the truth of yesterday and the hope it still counted today. Yesterday began with iron in the wind and a clean, cutting sky. I was walking a dry creek, testing for damp sand, when I saw blood in a hoofprint. 10 steps later, I found her under a cottonwood, half in shade, half in fever. Leather at her shoulder was torn where a bullet had scored bone and left heat to finish the job. She tried to rise. Breath failed her. Her eyes burned with that hard, bright look a body wears when it's burning itself to stay alive. Easy, I said, showing my hands. Before the knife, I cut the seam and rinsed the wound with the last of my whiskey. She didn't cry out. She locked her jaw and met me level. I packed the hole with the whitest cloth I owned and a smear of honey I'd saved for winter coughs. When I asked her name, she shaped Ayana like a thing that would not be taken. My mare, blue, washed with one ear, patient as a friend who knows you're about to spend what you cannot replace. I got Ayana into the saddle by leaning my whole life under her weight and tied her steady with my bedroll straps. Blue bumped my chest with her nose. Decide. I took the rein and we went north, bootfalls slipping in pebbles, our shadows climbing the bank and sliding back. 6 hours is long enough to turn a choice into blisters. Ayana drifted and surfaced. Once she whispered water, I tipped the canteen and counted the swallows. The sun tightened everything it touched. The only witness was the empty sky. The boundary stones rose out of scrub like teeth. Everyone on both sides knows them. They aren't lines on paper. They're agreements you can bruise your shin on. I stopped and listened. If I led her over on foot, I might not leave. If I turned back with her, she might not wake. Lydia's voice, my sister, 2 winters gone to fever I tried to outrun, came up in me. Do right while there's still a you to do it that I tightened Blue's cinch, checked the knots twice, settled Iana's weight like easing a child after a bad dream. I swapped the bridle for a hackamore so nothing would catch if fear found her. My hands wanted to keep what they loved. I put my face to Blue's neck and felt the warm thud that had hauled me through storms. Then I gave her away. I slapped Blue's rump and sent her through the teeth of those stones. Iana tied safe, my future untied. The mare went forward like she understood and agreed. Hoofbeats ran into chaparral and then into my ribs, where they kept echoing. I stood there and let out the kind of prayer that doesn't know who it's for. It sounded like apology braided. With hope, the world went still. I slung the bridle over my shoulder like a useless relic and turned south. Town lay that way. So did questions I couldn't answer. Every step wrote the same sentence up my back. You did right. You will pay. Do. Not flinched up dusk. My canteen was memory, and the wind had a knife in it. A single rider took shape on the ridge and melted into the dark, as if to say, we saw. A man doesn't send a life across a line without the line sending something back. Today, under 70 white feathers and a silence that could split stone, I know what returned wasn't revenge. It was a debt called in by people who keep their books in honor instead of blood. The gray-haired rider eased his bay until our shadows touched. He tucked the feather behind his ear and opened his hand. A rawhide bridal charm, fresh ink dark in its grooves, marks like tracks in river sand that he spoke. The ridge answered with women's song. My mare appeared. Blue wore a new hackamore hung with tin. Iana sat straight despite the bandage. Behind her rode a woman with white hair to her waist, face pared down to truth. They stopped 10 paces away. The old woman looked through me like a smith checking iron. Iana slid down and set the charm in my palm. He is Nadine, she said of the rider. She is the eldest mother. The old woman spoke. Iana gave the meaning in careful pieces. You sent life across the stones, she said. We don't forget. You gave the horse gift. It binds giver and receiver. A horse given for a life ties 2 fires. The knot is honor. Teeth cannot bite it. Iron cannot cut it. She touched the spot between her eyes and nodded for me to follow. I did. Nadine tied a thin thong around my wrist. Not tight, a reminder. Guest, Iana said. Until sunset. After sunset, there is choosing. What? Choice. Brother or enemy. No third path. If you are brother, your fire is our fire. If you are enemy, we end the debt and close the road between us. She added, we would have helped her anyway. The horse gift makes the choosing necessary. They led me along a game trail into a basin I'd walked past without seeing. Willow and earth houses leaned into the slope. Smoke went straight up. Children moved solemn with errands. Eyes weighed me. The eldest mother took my face in both hands and looked until the heat bled out of my stubbornness. She thanks you for the breath you returned to her daughter, Iana said. Daughter pulled a knot in my chest. Iana steadied her mouth. Nadine held out a feather. Up close it wasn't pure white. Sun browned the quill, smoke gray lived in the barbs. He didn't press it on me. He waited to see what kind of man I would be in front of everyone. I hadn't carried Iana for reward. I hadn't sent Blue with a plan. Still, here was the bill. I slid the quill under my hatband, left of center. A small change moved through the basin. Shoulders eased. Hands finished what they held. Nadine touched his knuckles to my chest, and then his own. Guest, Iana said again, and I heard the braid in the word. Witness. Relief warmed me at Iana's breath and Blue's ears forward. It chilled when the eldest mother tied a second thong to my wrist and its twin to a peg. Not prisoner, attached. So you do not float away, Iana said. There is mercy in being held to what you said you would be, so I did not pull. Afternoon worked steady. Fires fed, hides stretched, runners sent. The song did not quit. I sat under cottonwood and learned what I'd dodged since Lydia died. Once you give a piece of your life, it no longer belongs only to you. When the light leaned west, Nadine cut the peg free, left the thong on my wrist, and touched the feather at my hat. Sunset, he said, pointing where the day would fall like a door. Choosing. He opened his hand, palm up, inviting me to fill the emptiness with whatever I was. They led me into the basin as if I walked a string, held straight. not tight. Children watched with the hunger people give a story about to choose. Around the fires, work moved like breathing. The day already had shape. I was the only new piece. On a board set, Ayana stayed near enough to speak and far enough that I wouldn't lean on her. Blue-cropped willow by the creek, ears flicking between me and water. Twice I stepped toward her, and twice the eldest mother's hand, barely raised, held me. Guest meant witnessed, not freed at the center. A stone ring held a fire. Nadine fed. It cedar, each stick a sentence in a letter that had to be right the first time. The eldest mother drew a narrow line of ochre from my hairline to the bridge of my nose, then pressed her thumb to my brow. The touch felt like a door closing behind me. Ayana translated. You are seen. You will be measured for what you are, not what you claim. Nadine spoke the day's law in pieces and waited for my nod after each. 3 tests, Ayana said. First, speak straight, with no fire in your words. Second, pay a price that is yours to pay. Third, place the breath of many above your one breath. The second test snagged. What price? I asked. Not told, Ayana said. If a man prices his life beforehand, he cheapens it. Boys ran a rawhide line between stakes along the ring. What looked like spectacle was order. It kept the crowd back, so words stayed clean, and kept me from running if panic took my legs. That a young man brought a folded bundle. Deerskin shirt beaded with pale shells, leggings, soft moccasins, a tight-plated belt, and held them like lone tools. If you wear them, Ayana said, you enter the circle as one who may be redeemed by our law, not judged only by yours. I looked at my shirt, trail stiff, salt-stained, honest as a ledger written. By a life of leaving. I traded it for deer. The moccasins received my feet like a good horse receives your hands. The eldest mother nodded once. Now you can stand where we stand, Ayana said. It is harder than it sounds. Harder, because standing somewhere isn't only feet and dirt. It is agreeing to be known in a language not your own. My stubbornness wanted a speech. I let it die unsaid. They sat me by the fire and looped a thong from my wrist to a cedar stake no thicker than a broom. The knot wasn't strong. A child could have worried it loose. That was the point. I was asked to hold myself here, not to be held. Break it, and my feet would pick enemy without a shout. Ayana set a wooden bowl in my hands. Bone broth, clean and rich. I drank and watched smoke walk the sky. I thought of Lydia's fever and how I tried to fix death with motion until I was a man-shaped mile marker. Giving blue was the first thing I'd done that did not serve running. It cost less than mourning, which is a bill that never stops arriving. When the sun leaned, Nadine stood. Soon, Ayana said. First words under rope. Then sacrifice. Then the many. She touched the white feather in my hat. This says you agree to be bound by what you cannot see. Do you? I do, I said, and felt how small and exact those words are when a whole life has to fit inside them. By sunset, the basin was a listening place. Torches ringed the stone circle, smoke braided into the first stars, and people stood behind the rawhide line holding their breath. Nadine planted a cedar stake and tied my wrist thong to it with a square. Not a child could pick. 5 elders took the front bench. Painted, sober, faces that had seen men drown in their own talk. Ayana stood to my right, the bridge between tongues. 70 riders waited beyond the fire in a crescent, each feather catching and letting go of light. Nadine began. Why our ground? Ayana turned it to me. I gave it back plain. Because I was tired and stupid, I said. I cut a mile. What? Did you hope to gain by helping Ayana? Cattle? Passage? A name among our enemies? I hoped she would live, I said, and maybe the sound in my head would quiet. What sound? Ayana asked. My sister's last breath, I said. I wasn't there. I was in a card room trying to win back winter hay. Nadine tipped his chin. A man who walks with ghosts sometimes does good to pay them rent. Is that you? Maybe, I said. Both. I wanted to do right. I also wanted not to feel like a coward. If I call it holy, I lie. If I call it nothing, I lie too. The oldest elder, paint like dry riverbeds, leaned forward. Reward for the horse. No, I said. I expected to be thirsty and to miss that mare, and that no one would see it. I am not a good man every day. Yesterday I was. They asked about fights, debts, and temper. I said I once bloodied a friend over cards and made it right with my last blanket. I said I carry Lydia's braid, and sometimes hate that I remember its feel more than her laugh. I said I have lied to save face and told truth when it cost me money. I am trying. That is not the same as good. Words under rope are not bar talk. You hear yourself choose. Twice I stopped and changed a sentence because I heard pride in it. Pride wanted me to be a man who rescues without thinking. The truth was I did think, and I chose. And I knew there might be a price, and I paid it anyway. At last the oldest elder rose and walked to me with a bit of charcoal. He drew a short black line on the cedar stake that held my thong and blew the dust away. Ayana said, "First test done." A murmur like rain came and went. Nadine cut the square knot, but left the thong on my wrist. He tossed the freed end into the fire. "Now the price," Ayana said softly. Second test. Relief came when the pain finally had a name. I had not been asked to be perfect, only true. Nadine gestured, and a boy ran with a cedar box bound in rawhide. He set it at the foot of the stake like an altar waiting for an offering. Feathers rose and sank as if the night breathed once together. "Price," I said under my breath to steady my hands. "Let's be done with it." Nadine slipped the rawhide and raised the lid. Cedar breath rose. 5 arrows lay in a fan, each ringed with a color: red, black, white, blue, yellow. Their points were meant for work. Ayana's voice carried. 5 prices. 5 hands to carry them. You must name the hands. What do they mean? I asked. She touched them in turn. Red, fire, pain accepted. Black, night, taken where you cannot see. White, cutting, blood without rage. Blue, water, thirst until the mind staggers. Yellow, bitter root, a test of what the heart hides. Nadine lifted each shaft for the people to read, then laid them back like entries in a ledger. He did not help. The law's mercy was to let me reveal myself. If I named 5 people, I would be saying my place was worth their suffering. If I refused, I could be calling their law an insult. Either path could turn a rescue into theft. Before I could choose, a girl stepped from the women's side and touched the blue. 16, maybe. A man I took for her father didn't stop her. His jaw worked like grinding stone. A rope-muscled hunter with a scar smile touched the red. A grandmother with wrists like willow placed 2 fingers on the black. 2 more followed, silent and steady. 5 lives stood between me and the easy lie that would let me belong. My tongue pressed my teeth. I looked at the girl and saw Lydia, 15, flushed with fever while I chased him money in a card room. I looked at the hunter and his 2 small shadows. I looked at the old woman, who had already paid more than I could guess and was willing to pay again. They waited for my mouth to purchase them. Ayana broke the hush. "Name the hands, Sterling Maddox." "No," I said. The word dropped like a rock. A murmur went around. Feathers tilted forward. The eldest mother raised her palm, and the sound died. I pulled air until my ribs creaked. "I will take them." Ayana blinked. "One. All," I said, feeling the knot tie under my breastbone. "Every arrow. If there's a price that belongs to me, I'll pay with what is mine. Do not set your children or your elders in the road of my debt." Silence held. Nadine's mouth moved. Respect or pity, I couldn't read. The eldest mother studied me as if I were a map that kept changing. "He asks to carry all," she said through Ayana. "He knows when a 5 breaks men and asks still." I nodded. I had been a man who traded minutes for coin and called it survival. This was coin of one kind only. Mine. Nadine placed the 5 arrows in my hands. The feathers brushed my wrists. "The second test is not a theater," Ayana said. "Lo, for me alone. If you had named them, we would have kept your place and loved you with a bruise. You chose a brother's place." I looked at the volunteers. The girl's chin lifted a fraction. The hunter's children hid their faces and peeked out, smiling because danger had passed them. This time, the grandmother nodded once. "Begin?" Nadine asked. I closed my fingers until the points woke blood in my palms. "Begin," I said, not because I wanted to die, but because some things are worse than dying, and I had lived with them long enough. The 5 arrows sat in my palms like a sentence passed. Nadine reached to take the first, red, when a sound rolled across the basin that was not a word and not a cry. It was 70 feathers lifting at once, a white forest rising into torchlight. The hair on my arm stood. The elders looked to the eldest mother. She had not moved. She only watched me as if the rest of the night were written on the back of my eyes that Nadine's hand hovered. The eldest mother spoke 3 short phrases. Ayana swallowed, then gave them to me. She says, the second test is ended. A man who keeps pain for himself, so the young and the old do not carry it has paid. And the third test, placing the breath of many above one, is also done in the asking. I didn't understand at first. Habit reaches for punishment the way a hand reaches for a rung in the dark. I haven't carried anything yet, I said. You offered to, Ayana answered, voice low. Our law says choosing suffering for others stains a man. Refusing to buy belonging with their hurt cleans him. Willingness to die before pushing a burden to a child is the cleanest water. That is enough. Nadine closed the cedar box and set it aside as if it contained thunder. That had spent itself. The oldest elder took my wrist and cut the thong with a flake of obsidian so sharp I felt heat before pain. He lifted the ragged end to the crowd. Debt finished, Ayana said. Road open. Something unfastened in the people. Murmurs ran like small wind through grass. The volunteers stepped back into the fold. The girl's father pressed his forehead to hers. The grandmother breathed out so slowly I could hear years leave her shoulders. My own breath shook and steadied. Nadine faced the warriors and lifted his feather. 70 riders answered, feathers high, then crossed over their chests. The gesture wasn't triumph. It was a binding. Ayana's hand found my sleeve and squeezed once. Quick. As if to anchor me before the next wave. It came as gifts, real. Things for a life, not medals. A woman I'd never seen pressed a pair of rolled socks into my palm, tight and tidy as care. A boy gave me a bone awl and grinned like he'd slipped me a secret key. The Scarsmile hunter set a pouch of dried meat by my knee and touched his heart with 2 fingers. The grandmother looped a thin string with a carved bead around my wrist where the thong had been. So the place that held you will remember being held kindly. Ayana translated, smiling for the first time since I'd met her. Blue came led by a child with careful hands. My mare wore lines of white clay along her neck and a single short braid tied with a feather where her mane fell like dusk. The hackamore had been rubbed with fat until it shone. Someone had stitched one small tin disc to the cheek strap. It caught firelight and tossed it back. My throat closed. I touched Blue's jaw and she pushed her nose into my chest as if we were the only 2 fools on earth and we had finally found each other. Nadine set his palm flat over my heart and spoke. Brother, Ayana said. The word landed solid as a saddle tree. Then he turned to the people and spoke longer. Ayana gave me the pieces. 70 fires will give shelter to this man. 70 paths will watch his back. If harm hunts him, harm will meet us first. He paused, then added something like a smile. Also, his mare belongs to him twice now. If he loses her again, we will shame him. Laughter broke like a small rain. It didn't mock, it made room. I laughed with them and felt my face change shape around it. As if a tight mask had come off and left skin new to air, they lifted me. Not on shoulders, not above them, just into their middle. Bread as soft as a memory was pressed into my palm. Water touched my mouth that tasted like leaf shadow. Drums began, slow and low, more heartbeat than song. The eldest mother came last. She took my face in those same work-strong hands and held me still until I could not pretend I was anyone she had not already seen. Honor is not a story you tell when you are warm, Ayana translated. It is what you do when the cold bites your lungs. The old woman kissed my brow where the ochre line had dried. Do not forget whose breath you saved when your own seems small. I thought of Lydia. I thought of the way a house sounds after a death when every board creaks like it is looking for someone. I whispered, I won't. The cedar stake that had held me was laid on the fire. It burned fast and bright, and then was nothing. The white feathers lowered. The night went on as nights do, but I was not the same man who had stood on the ridge counting his breaths and waiting for a law he could not see to fall. Night unstitched the drums until only embers and the creek were talking. People settled back into their circles. Feathers on Blue's tack, at the throat latch, the tail, the bit cheek, whispered with each breath. Ayana found me by the water, her arm wrapped clean. Where will you go? She asked. The eldest mother stood behind her like a ridge behind a valley. North, I said. Graze along the forks. Fence where it keeps water clean. When winter snaps, there'll be fire for whoever's caught. Between. Ayana listened like a scout listening to snow. Good, she said. North asks a man to keep choosing. She set a bundle in my palm. Jerky, a twist of tea, a white bead carved like a feather. For your sister, she said. I slid the bead into Blue's mane and felt the tightness in my chest pick up its bedroll and move on. Nadine came with 3 riders. Escort, Ayana said. Not to lead. To make your shadow look bigger to danger. Before we left, the eldest mother pressed her forehead to mine. You carry a name now, Ayana said. Not to hang around your neck, something to walk inside. The old woman spoke 2 words. 70 feathers. It felt exact, an inventory, not a trophy that we rode under a sky so crowded with stars. The dark seemed a net. We moved like a sentence said carefully. At each rise, one rider peeled away, toward a hill, a campsite, a creek cut into the plain. Each departure felt less like losing a guard and more like learning I could ride alone without being alone, that we reached the forks at first light. Cottonwoods stitched the banks in bent green. Mist lay where the water slowed. I chose a rise that let the river breathe and walked the place with my hands. The slope, the drainage, the way a fence could ask cattle to be wise. When I turned, only one rider remained. He touched his feather to his chest and angled east without a word. I dug the first post hole with a borrowed shovel and a private prayer. Blue grazed. The bead winked when she shook flies. I braided Lydia's hair into a longer thong for my hat band and sat with the ache that followed. The loudest part of a story isn't the lesson. It's the quiet after, when you live by what you said with no one watching. I boiled tea, tied a square knot in new rope, and set a flat stone where a traveler might sit out of the wind. When I mounted, Blue lifted into a walk that felt like a beginning I could keep. North was waiting. Winters, thin years, neighbors, and the sound of hooves one day when 70 families would pass needing water and leave more than they took. I wasn't a hero. I was a man with a good mare, a new name that felt like a job, and enough road to keep choosing. I touched the feather at my hat and the bead in Blue's mane. All right, I said. Let's prove it. The night listened. Lo,